So there you are, a normal person in the mid-1700s, going about your day, when you learn that one of the best preachers around is coming to your village. The sky's overcast, but it should be indoors, so it's not that big a deal. But when you get there, there's so many people that the streets are filled. You aren't prepared to stay in the rain, so should you just go home? Suddenly, the preacher comes out and he says, "Don't worry, guys, nobody's going to be getting wet while he's there." And as he talks, the rain starts pouring down all over town. But the preacher and everyone else in the crowd stay totally dry. What the heck is happening? How is this even possible? He finishes his speech, and the crowd really doesn't know what to do. They're just stuck in awe. You feel as though your life has changed forever. You feel saved. And that was the power of Paul of the Cross. Howdy all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of St. Paul of the Cross, whose devotion was immeasurable and his love for others overflowing. All right, guys and gals, we're going to spice things up this week and start at Paul's birth. I know, crazy. But Paul was born January 3rd, 1694, and his birth name was Paolo Francesco Danier. He was from the town of Howdy in Piedmont, which is in northern Italy, and his parents were by no means wildly wealthy or influential, though they weren't poor either. Their focus was their faith, not money or worldly possessions, though. Paul's father, Luca, actually ran a small store, and they wound up moving the family closer to Genoa in an effort to just gain more business. Together with his wife, Anna Maria Massardi, they had not one, not two, not 3, not 10, but 16 children. But only 6 survived infancy. I can't imagine what that would be like to lose 10 children while they're still just infants. And personally, I don't really want to. It must have been deeply devastating for Luca and Anna, but they truly cherished the children that they did have, and they inspired their children so strongly. Paul said that his mother was his inspiration, who set him down his path of faith-filled success. From a young age, Paul learned the hardships of loss. He was the second child, so he had endured a lot with his family. There were 13 other kids, and he saw some of them grow up into wonderful people, and he sadly lost a lot of them. But he would have to put that aside. He went to school to get an education. He was taught by a priest in Cremolino, Lombardy, and by the time he was 15, he had learned all he could there, and he went back closer to home to get further education, and he also taught some catechism classes in his spare time. After a few years of doing this, a combination of events actually triggered a strong change in his life. He read Treatise on the Love of God by Francis de Sales, and he heard a sermon from his pastor that particularly resonated with him, and those two were the strongest influences for his change. He pursued a life devoted to prayer, believing that God is most readily found in the Passion of the Christ. He spent countless hours praying and pondering about the Passion, and it led him down a path of devotion. He also felt that he needed to perform severe penance, scourging himself, which is whipping himself, fasting, sleeping on a stiff board, and just really living a life that nobody would be envious of. And he thought all of these actions would help bring him closer to God, but he still felt it wasn't enough. So in 1715, when he was just 21, he left home because he felt that he had to join a crusade against the Turks threatening the Venetian Republic. And having Pope Clement XI encourage young men to join only convinced Paul even more that it was the right thing to do. So sounds like he was a kind of headstrong young man who was just eager to do what he believes was the right thing. Now, whether you think the crusades were right or wrong, they afforded many young men the opportunity to do what they felt was right in the moment. And still today, there's many young people that are eager to prove their dedication to what they believe in. So Paul really wasn't that different from another person, just any young adult today. But early on in his crusading, while in a church in Crema, Paul heard the voice of God. It told him that this wasn't the battle he was meant to fight. The battlefield Paul was going to fight on wasn't a literal battlefield, but a spiritual one. And so he left the crusade to return home and start acting on what he was called to do. While he was traveling back to his home, he rested in Novella in 1716. While there, he began to help an elderly couple who had no children to help take care of them. And they were so appreciative that they offered to leave him their inheritance, but Paul declined the offer. He wasn't about worldly possessions, and Upon arriving back home, Paul sought guidance from his parish priest. The priest recognized that Paul's piety was stronger than just any old person's, so he tested Paul. Instead of the ordinary penance that he would give for confession, he gave Paul harsher acts. He was even said to attempt to humiliate Paul in some ways in public, but the harshest test? He told Paul to go to a dance. I know, terrible, right? Well, trust me, it was bad. Paul hated the idea of having to do that kind of thing. But he did it, except when he stepped onto the dance floor, all of a sudden, all of the instruments broke. And for some reason, this particular moment was the sign that proved to the priest that Paul had a special calling from God. But what exactly was he to do? They still had to figure that part out. Later on, his uncle, who just so happened to be a priest, attempted to set up an arranged marriage for Paul. But Paul said, no thanks, I don't want to marry anyone. Even though the bride-to-be was from a very wealthy family, and Paul's uncle even offered to make him his heir, Paul still was like, no thanks. So he continued to live his life the way he felt was most aligned with what God had planned for him. When he was only 24, Paul was elected to be the president of the local confraternity, which is basically just a group of ordinary people when a church isn't really around for them to attend, at least not regularly. And he was known to regularly give profound spiritual exhortations. People would set time aside of their day just to hear Paul speak. He was that good. He helped those in need, and he inspired those who were lost. And he ensured that everybody was treated well and treated fairly if they came to him for help. He was granted the gift from God to look at people and know their sins, to read their souls in a way. He knew what troubled them most without them having to tell him. People were moved by this, and many people were converted as a result. The people of the town already to begin consider that Paul was a living saint at just 24 years old. That's incredible. Then one day, when he was 26 years old, he was praying and he felt something else come over him. He felt something take the reins and guide him in a series of visions, and he heard and saw the Virgin Mary speak to him. The ideas were given to him to start a community to promote God's love that was displayed in the Passion of Christ. He saw himself wearing a black habit with a white cross over his heart, and he saw others alongside him wearing the same habit. And in one vision, he even saw Mary appear before him wearing that habit. Right away, Paul established his community. He called it the Poor of Jesus, but later it became known as the Congregation of the Passion of Jesus, or just the Passionists. Paul's bishop encouraged his actions after he consulted with another bishop and gave Paul approval, and he gave him the black habit typical of a hermit. Funnily, well, I think it's kind of funny at least, Paul was the only member. But that didn't impact his devotion. In 1720, he had a 40-day retreat during which he wrote the rules of his community. The rules? Live a penitential life in solitude and poverty, and to teach people the simplest ways to meditate on the passion of Jesus Christ. The first person to join Paul's community was none other than his own brother, John Baptist. Not to be confused with the famous John the Baptist, his brother was actually named John Baptist. The two moved to Rome in an effort to gain approval for their community, but they didn't find success in this endeavor at first, so they returned home after being denied entry by the guards of the city and continued their devoted lives and efforts to bring people closer to God through understanding the Passion of Christ. A few years later, they tried again, but this time they found more success. Cardinal Corandini invited them to help at a hospital that he had recently founded, and the two brothers gave their all to this cause. They provided what medical services they could, but their main focus was to provide as much spiritual healing as they could. While helping at the new hospital, Cardinal Corandini took a particular fondness to the brothers, and he encouraged them to seek ordination into the priesthood. They took a class in pastoral theology, and if they completed it, Pope Benedict XIII ordained them into priesthood on June 7th, 1727. And after this, the two traveled to remote parishes to preach to the people where priests either weren't at or just weren't taking their duties as seriously as they should. Paul developed a reputation as one of the best preachers of his day. And not just because he was good at preaching, but also because he meant what he said, and he would help the ordinary person whenever he could. As you might be able to guess, this is when Paul and John's community really started gaining traction and people started to join. The Passionists, now numbering 9 men, opened their first monastery, or as they called them, retreat, in 1737 on Monte Argentario. They spent much of their time in contemplative solitude, meditating on the Passion of Christ, and at a minimum, they devoted 3 hours every single day to this activity. Now, this way of living wasn't particularly conducive to rapidly growing the community, but that wasn't the point. Paul wanted people of quality over quantity. He didn't want masses of people only partially devoted to their faith. He wanted people who wholly devoted themselves without an ounce of trepidation to living as a passionist. Being a renowned preacher, Paul also wrote many letters to people all over, and we're fortunate enough to have over 2,000 of these letters preserved to this day. Just like the letters from St. Nicesius, these letters from Paul of the Cross really help show us what kind of person he was and how influential he was in shaping a path for his faith and for his community. Over the next few decades, that was Paul's life, guiding people in need of someone to lead them down the right path, founding new monasteries or retreats, and preaching to the people, spreading his faith to others. He passed away on October 18th, 1775, at the retreat of Saints John and Paul, which is crazy to think about, such a foundational saint dying just as the United States was getting ready to declare its independence. Like, thinking about all these events, I'm feeling they went back centuries before then, but it was literally within a year of each other that Paul of the Cross passed away and the United States made their big play, becoming independent. History is just a crazy thing once you get into it. But by the time Paul died, there were 280 Passionists across 12 retreats, including one retreat for a group of nuns in Corneto, which was finished in just 1771, a few years before Paul died. During his lifetime, there were many miracles that Paul performed, and here's just a few of them. So, a soldier in a barracks was being tormented and dragged by an unseen force. Knowing it was a demon, Paul held up a crucifix and demanded that the demon leave. That only made things a little worse. The demon paused, but then it got a whole lot messier. So Paul had the soldier perform an act of contrition, and afterwards Paul again demanded the departure of the evil spirit, and this time it fled. The soldier confessed then and there, and he converted as a result of this encounter. Another time, an enormous crowd had gathered to listen to Paul give a sermon. In fact, the crowd was so large that the church couldn't fit everyone, so they started gathering in a courtyard just outside. And just as Paul was starting to talk in the door of the church so that people inside and outside could hear him, a torrential downpour began. Seeing people flee because the weather was so bad, Paul held up a crucifix and demanded the rain stop. Instantly it stopped. The people that had been soaked from the rain became totally dry, as if it just never even rained at all. And then on an occasion when Paul was going to the Isle of Elba to speak with the locals, he needed a ship, but no ship was around. He found a captain, but the captain's ship was badly damaged and it was thrown up on shore from a recent storm. Paul said, "Don't worry, God will help and provide them with a safe voyage." The captain, Paul, and a couple of others gathered near their ship to try and push it back into the sea, but there just wasn't nearly enough manpower to move it. It was not budging. So Paul pulled out his crucifix. He held the crucifix in one hand and pushed with the other, and everyone else said it was as though the boat became totally weightless, and so they set out. Despite the condition of the ship, it made it totally safely, and no sooner had they arrived and disembarked when the ship split in two and sank. And there are a bunch more miracles that Paul performed, and you can find them listed on a few websites online. It's pretty crazy to go through them all. These were just a few that I liked and felt like sharing with you guys. Paul was beatified on October 1st, 1852, and later canonized on June 29th, 1867, both times by Pope Pius IX, who actually had a 32-year papacy, which is the second longest in history. His feast day actually has some unique history too. It was originally set for celebration on April 28th, but in 1969 it was moved to October 19th, the day after Paul's death day. That's because St. Luke the Evangelist's feast day is October 18th, and the church didn't want a feast day to diminish the other, even though there's multiple saints on any given feast day, which is a little confusing. I don't know how they decide who's worth focusing on, who isn't. Aside from that, in North America, Paul's feast day is actually October 20th, because the Feast of the North American Martyrs is on October 19th. So it's almost like musical feast days, if you want to think about it that way. Paul is the patron saint of Hungary and of Ovada, Italy, where he was originally from, and of the Passionist Order. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So, what do you think of St. Paul of the Cross? I wish I could have heard some of his sermons, don't you? They sound really incredible, and sure, we could maybe look some up, but it's the way he delivered them that really had a profound impact. I hope you found his story interesting, and I look forward to reading about your thoughts on St. Paul of the Cross. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast, and I should have a few episodes uploaded. Take care, and have a wonderful day.